Hello everybody, it's Karen in the courtyard and it is September 20th. It's getting cooler. I love that. We are going to present another guest gardening video today, and that is our friend Bruce, who is a conservationist in his garden. He does a lot of natives, but he also is interested in so many aspects of gardening I've never heard of. So I think you might find it interesting. He's a wonderful fellow. And without further ado, here's Bruce.
I'm really happy, Karen, that you're going to explore my garden with me. I've lived here for 30 years, and when I first bought this property, it was derelict and vines covered everything. Grapevines, honeysuckle had just consumed everything. So the early years were pushing all that back and establishing different beds and different plantings and building stone walls. Part of this process was establishing some boundaries and framework. And because this hillside is quite steep, I needed to create a retaining wall. So I built this stone wall and these steps. And these steps, I like a rustic sort of natural feeling. So as we go up, you'll see the steps. I tried to integrate them into the landscape and plant around them. And this little space to the left coming up is the herb garden, which has lots of different herbs mixed together. As we start to go up the stone steps to the studio area, this is a diverse landscape, and I like it because having such a diversity attracts a lot of different insects and birds, and that's a consistent theme throughout the property, is that whatever likes it, I let it go to town and establish things around it. So I've tried a lot of different plants. The soil here is a serpentine soil, so it has a lot of heavy metals in it, and for a lot of plants it's a difficult soil to grow in. But fortunately there are a lot of plants that are adapted to this tougher soil. So we're going to go on up the need to weed out certain invasive things that are prolific in this area. Japanese stiltgrass being one of the worst offenders. But we also have other things, some of which I'll let a few of them go because they're so attractive, and try to get them after the flower but before the seed. A big part of this my project here has been to control erosion on this hill. Because once I took out a lot of the honeysuckle and grapevine, the hillside was opened up, so I needed to control it. So having a density of wildflowers is important for holding back the erosion. And the milkweed, we're coming over to this part of the garden where I have a lot of milkweed. And this was seed that I collected along the Baltimore-Annapolis Trail when I was bike riding. I brought home a couple pods and I dispersed the seeds on this hillside, and it really has taken off. And so you can see the pods here of the milkweed, and then you see the butterflies really like the gooseneck loosestrife. I've never used any chemicals on the land here. I really think it's important for the insects not to use any pesticides or herbicides. I rarely use fertilizer. I think maybe I've used fertilizer about 2 times in 30 years. So I try to do things as natural as possible. We have a compost pile where I put all our food scraps and leaves. and that's what I use to amend the soil if I want to. And so when I look at the stilt grass, which is really a problem, the best I can do is mow it where I'm trying to keep pathways open, but I don't really want any lawn. So where you see grass, it's really as a path. We're up on the hill above the house, and I've planted most of the trees that you see, a lot of them 30 years ago, but because our predominant weather patterns for cold winter winds are from the northwest, you'll see a lot of evergreens here on the northwest side of the house, where you're looking now. And then on the south side of the house I have deciduous trees to block the sun in the summer but let the winter sun in. And we get all of our electric power from solar panels. So that's been really a wonderful thing. We've had those about 10 years, and after the initial investment, after 7.5 years, we are into the money as they've been fully paid off, and they supply all of our electric power. So I've tried to keep this landscape interesting and as natural as possible. So I know that there are lots of native wildflowers here, and things that I've introduced as well. But by keeping the aggressive invasives to a minimum, or letting them go where the natives are more competitive with them, I can keep the pesticide use eliminated. So we can walk up into the forest this way, and I've been planting. I usually plant about anywhere from 20 to 50 trees a year. On the upper property, we're probably about 50 feet above the house here, 60 feet, and this is the woodland area. We're on the edge of the forest of Lake Roland Park. And this last year I bought 100 little trees from the state tree nursery, and so on the edge of the forest I've planted lots of little trees, and I have to put them in cages, so because the deer are in great numbers back here, and so everything gets caged. I'll show you back here the size of these trees that come in an envelope from the state tree nursery. They're quite small, but they're healthy. They're bare root plants. They come about this size, and so I plant them in these cages, and I hope for the best. I use newspaper as mulch, and we'll see how out of 100 I've already lost maybe 15%, just because it's tough to maintain all these back in the forest. We'll head this way. These cages are all spread back up and through the forest. What I do when I have the grasses, I have to cut every fall, or actually I cut them in February after the plumes start to fail. I bring them up here and I create a cribbage of logs and branches, and then I cover it with grass, and this is to create a habitat for the fox. There goes a deer running through the forest back there. I just caught a glimpse of. But we have a fox den inside of this creation, and I create a number of these things with all the brush off the property. So the different animals like to have protection of these assemblages of debris. So that's why you'll see these piles, and some of them I roof with the grass cuttings. And those are the ones. This one is particularly popular with the fox. So we've had the fox denning inside this one with the grass on top for the last probably 10 years. So I like to create as many habitats here as possible. through the plantings and how I manage the landscape. And that includes what you do with the debris from the landscape, how you handle that. None of it has to leave the property, and that's my philosophy. It should all be recycled and reused here. So if it's a log laying on the ground, that will be a habitat for salamanders underneath, and there's always things that are living in these piles of debris that I have scattered through the property. It's at once it looks just wild and unmanaged, but I have to tell you, it's a lot of work to keep it from being just overrun with grapevine and honeysuckle and some of the other invasives like stiltgrass. So stiltgrass is highly invasive. If there's any light at all, it will take off, and it can grow seemingly to 24 inches, maybe even taller in places. I've seen it as high as like 3 feet, and it crowds out everything. So all of the native wildflowers and plants, even seedlings, will not survive. So even where I've planted to protect from deer, I also have to keep the stiltgrass out of the cages, because if you have small seedlings, this will destroy everything. And the deer don't eat it, so it's not particularly enjoyed by any of our native wildlife, and it destroys all of the native plants. Here in this forest and in the landscape here around Baltimore, we have a lot of deer, and between the deer and the stiltgrass, the small native plants have such a hard time surviving, and that's why I've devoted a lot of effort to protecting them and trying to have young oak trees grow. I've got a number of young oak trees, because oaks, if you don't have the young ones coming along, this native forest of oaks will reach its climax, its maturity, and it will die, and there won't be any replacement trees. That's a real shame. So we're trying to counteract some of those effects of the stiltgrass and the other barberry, which was imported, I believe, from Japan as an ornamental. But if it gets loose, it also will spread prolifically, and it's very spiny, so not fun to have around places where you would walk. And then right next to it is another very tough plant to have in your landscape, and that's greenbrier. And then an ornamental that people have is wisteria, which is fine if it's highly controlled, but once it gets loose, wisteria will create havoc in your landscape. So you have 3 invasives quite close to each other, and this is the only way I can deal with this is manually, either by digging them out, which is the best way, or weed whacking them just to keep them down. But I do have patches of wildness here, which, because I have 4 acres, I can't control it all. So it's my aspiration is to get all the invasives out, but it's a challenge. And, so that challenge presents me with the choice sometimes, like down by the house, of using Pachysandra. So I don't have to spend as much time there. I can spend more time up here trying to manage the landscape. So we're going to walk over to a tree line I've established over here. Not much for fences, so this is the edge of the property here. So I'm working to establish a tree line of evergreens, and they're planted close together, really too close together, but once in a while I'll harvest one out for a tree at Christmas time. And but we have the main goal here is to create a privacy screen ultimately along this property. And so I'm quite happy, even though I'm 65 years old, to plant a tree that might not be in its full maturity for another 20 to 30 years. Someone will enjoy it. I enjoy them as they grow to be mature trees. Like, here's an example of a volunteer cedar that I transplanted from another place on the property, and it will grow to be quite a majestic tree for one of these days. So this is a Chinese juniper. So I do enjoy planting special trees in the landscape. I'm not a purist as far as only planting native trees, as long as they're not ones that will be, I don't want to plant something that could get away from me. But these are not, the exotic specimens I have that I've planted have been ones that won't spread, but make for an interesting statement in the landscape. This dead tree here was a Japanese maple, and I decided to leave it because the birds love to perch on it, and my philosophy of encouraging wildlife. They need some dead trees. It's important for nesting sites and for perches. There you can see a bee house, a solitary bee house that I built, one of my pandemic projects, to encourage solitary bees. And I was building it, and while I was building it, the bees started moving in. But there are lots of different diameter holes in those different objects in the different cubbies of the bee house. And different solitary bees require different diameter holes to lay their eggs into. So that's what that little structure is. When I was planting and doing landscaping work, whenever I could get some of the serpentine rock out, I have. And at the entry to the house I've built down by Falls Road, I built a serpentine stone wall, and that was from a house that was being torn down up the street, and they just wanted to get rid of everything, so I carted lots of this serpentine stone down. I had a geology professor at Hopkins who thought that it was a crime to import non-native stones into a landscape. He was a geologist, so they probably threw the geologists off when they came upon non-native stones, but that was his philosophy. Don't bring anything onto your landscape that's not from that area, because the chemistry of the rock, as it breaks down, change the flora in that area. So I've always remembered that. This area here is kind of emblematic of what I do. We have oat grass, we have mint, we have snow in summer, we have sweet peas, milkweed. This is morning glory. None of these are in bloom right now. Yarrow, the sweet pea here, and it's just a kind of an amalgam of different things. And it looks totally wild, like it was just let go, but it's a lot of work to keep the invasives out. This is the kind of landscape I like, and maybe it's not pure. It's not one specific, highly planned landscape, but it is a highly managed and purposeful landscape.